Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. So my name is Muhammad Faris bin Muhammad Fuzi. So I'm instructor from UITM Lease, C School Netakat Academy. So for today we are going to learn one topic from CCNA 2, Switching, Routing and Wireless Essentials version 7.0. So the topic for today is from Model 7, DHCP version 4. Okay, so the objective for this topic is first we are going to learn about the concept of DHCP. Then we are going to configure a router as a DHCP version 4 server and also configure a router as a DHCP version 4 client. So these are the three objectives for this topic. Alright. Okay, so let's move into the first part, 7.1, DHCP version 4 concept. Okay, right, so DHCP version 4 concept. So as you can see that the word itself from DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configurations Protocol. Okay, we have here Dynamic Host Dynamic Host Configurations Protocol, which is this is the protocols for the configurations to assign the IP address and others network configurations informations dynamically to the host. Okay, let's put ourselves in this situation because of we have a huge number of end devices or networks nodes in the network. So how can we handle and manage this network? Because we know that every network's nodes, when connected to the network, this network node should be assigned one IP address. Okay, so means that these devices should be configured with the IP address of either statics or dynamic. If we have a less number of the network nodes, then it might be possible for us to do the manual configuration. But for a large network, small medium enterprise network, for the enterprise network, we have a huge number of network nodes. So how can we as a network administrator handles and manage to do the configurations for all of these network nodes? Okay, so there is no other way. We need to configure a DHCP server, which is one devices that will act and take the responsibility to assign the IP address automatically to the client. So means that for the client side, okay, for example, when the clients connected to the network, they are not required to do any configuration, any IP address configurations. Okay, so they just connected to the network either using the cable or using the wires. When they connected to the network, the HTTP server will automatically assign the IP address to that machines, to that network nodes, and then that nodes absolutely will have the connections to the network, right? So absolutely DHCP is extremely useful and time-saving tools for the networks administrator because we give the responsibility to the DHCP server to handle uh, in terms of assigning the IP address to the clients. Okay, and then from the network administrator part, what we can do is basically we also can monitor which devices will have the IP address because these informations we can obtain if we have dedicated server. Okay, so the next point is about dedicated DHCP server, which is scalable and relatively easy to manage. Okay, so normally for a small medium enterprise network and for the large organizations, for the HTTP server, so normally we configured one server. We configured one server and make the server is the dedicated server just to handle the DHCP functionality, right? So, however, in a small branch or Soho location, for example, in for our home network, we can use a router, okay, to be configured as a DHCP server, which provide the services without the need for a dedicated server. Okay, for example, for our homes, okay, for example, my home, I have a I have a unified 100 Mbps. Okay, so as we know that we have the wireless router. Okay, so inside the wireless router itself, we'll have the functionality of the DHCP server, which is when I want to connect it to the wireless network, I just search for the SSID, key in the password encryption key, and yes, I can connect it to the network without the needs to do the manual configurations of the IP address. Okay, this is because the wireless router at my home basically works as a DHCP server to assign the IP address to any devices that have the connections to the wireless and also to the wired network. Okay, so for DHCP servers, dynamically assigns or lists an IPv4 address from a pool address for a limited period of time chosen by the server until the client no longer needs the address. Okay, so we need to remember that for DHCP server, basically we have the one terms named as leases. Okay, so when the servers assign the IP address to the clients or list the IP address to the client, it will have a time period. Okay, so when the client is no longer need the address, they will list back the IP address to the pool. Okay, and also sometimes when the IP address that assigns for the clients is almost expired, then the clients are required to either request a new IP address or they can renew the list expired. Okay, they can renew the list. Okay, so we can see from the last point, it client lists the informations from the server for an administratively defined periods, and administrator configure the HTTP server to set the list to time out at different interval. And then for the list, basically can be anywhere from 24 hours to a week or more. When the list expires, the client must ask for another address. So normally, the client will obtain the same address. Okay. All right. So next is about the operations of DHCP version 4. So we know that DHCP works in a client server mode. So we have a DHCP clients and also DHCP server. So it works in terms of client and server modes. When the clients communicate with a DHCP version 4 servers, the servers will assign or list an IP address to that clients. Okay, so we have a DHCP servers, we have DHCP servers, and also we have a DHCP clients. So there should be the communication between these two devices. Okay, one server and the clients. All right, so the clients connect to the network with the that is IPv4 address until the list expires. Okay, and the client must contact the DHCP servers periodically to extend the list in case their IP address is about to expire, so they need to extend the list. So this list mechanism ensures that the clients that move or power off the machines do not keep the address when they no longer need. Okay, so means that when the machines move or turn off, so the IP address should be released back to the pool. So when a list expires, the DHCP server return the address to the pool where it can be relocated as necessary. So this is about the DHCP version 4 operations. All right, so next is about 4-step. Okay, we have 4-step process for the DHCP clients to obtain a list from the DHCP server. So this is the communication between the DHCP servers and client. All right. So this, as you can see that we have 4-step process for the client to obtain the DHCP, so to obtain the IP address from DHCP server. So we have the first is DHCP discover, DHCP offer, DHCP request, and DHCP acknowledgement. So this the communication should start from DHCP client. Okay, so the DHCP client will send the message, the broadcast message. Okay, broadcast means we send to the all the networks. Okay, so the DHCP version 4 client will send the DHCP broadcast, DHCP discover message, send as a broadcast message. So it will send and tell the DHCP servers that I need an address. I want to make a request for address. Okay. So when the servers, DHCP version 4 servers receive this broadcast message, then the servers will react or respond back to the broadcast message. And then what the server do is basically the server will send a unicast message. Unicast means that send directly to the DHCP version 4 clients. So we'll send the DHCP offer. So the server will offer, okay, I'm a DHCP server. The DHCP server tell the clients that I'm the DHCP server and I would like to provide and offer this address. Okay. And then for when the clients receive a DHCP offer or the address that been offered by the servers, so the server, the client will send the DHCP request. Okay, same will send as a broadcast message to inform the DHCP server that I will accept that offer. Okay, so means that the IP address that has been offered by the DHCP server will be accepted, okay, by the clients. Okay, and then once the servers knows that the IP address that has been offered being accepted by the HTTP clients, then the HTTP server will send the message, unicast message, the HTTP acknowledgements, just to acknowledge that your acceptance is acknowledged, just to acknowledge the client that that the IP address that has been offered has been accepted. Then the servers acknowledge that informations. Okay, so there are 4 steps we need to remember, that it start from the clients, which is the client will send the HTTP discover, and the server will respond back by sending the DHCP offer. Okay, and then the clients will accept the offers by sending back by send the message of DHCP request, and the server lastly will send the DHCP acknowledgement, okay, to acknowledge that informations. Okay, so that one previously we know that this is the 4th step to obtain the list, while there are 2 steps, okay, in case for the client want to renew the list, okay, because it already have the IP address. So now the client just wants to extend or renew a list. Okay, so what the client needs to do is, first the client needs to send a DHCP request. As you can see that now it's no longer broadcast message, because the clients already know the information about the DHCP server. So the client will send unicast message, a request, I would like to renew my list. Okay, and then the servers will receive, okay, either the server will receive and response back, or the servers does not respond. So it depends on the availability of the that DHCP servers. Okay, let's say the servers receive that request, okay, and then the servers will send and response back by sending the DHCP acknowledgements. Okay, your request is acknowledged, right? So this DHCP acknowledgement will acknowledge that information that the IP address that about to list to expire will be renewed. Okay, so this is the first concept, which is successfully the client successfully renew a list. Okay, There also will be situations where the clients, let me clear the page first. Okay, there also will be a situation when the DHCP client send a DHCP request to this server, and this server is not uh, response to renew the lease. Okay, so means that DHCP acknowledgement will be not sent. Okay, so this is the first situation. Okay, previously we learned about DHCP server will send back DHCP acknowledgement. So this one is okay. But what happened if this DHCP server is not sending this DHCP acknowledgement? All right. So the clients basically needs to send back the request, but this time instead of using the unicast, it will send the HTTP request. Okay, and then the client will send the broadcast message to another DHCP request. So when the client sends the DHCP request as a broadcast message, so if there is any other servers, others DHCP servers, then others DHCP servers uh, will respond back to this request. Okay, maybe this server is not sending the acknowledgement, and then when the client send broadcast message DHCP request, might be there is another DHCP server will respond back by sending the acknowledgement. Okay, so this is the second situation, right? So I think the second part, the second objective is about to do the configuration. So we are going to configure Cisco IFS DHCP version 4 server on a router. Right, so let's look into the diagram. So we have this topology. So later we are going to do the configurations. As we can see that uh, we have PCs. Okay, one PC connected to the switches. Okay, and then we are going to configure the routers as a DHCP version 4 servers, right? And then we are going to also to do the configurations of PC2 and PC1. So means that PC1 and PC2 will be set as a DHCP client. All right, so this PC1 and PC2 will be configured as a DHCP client. So should these two PCs should obtain the IP address automatically. All right, okay, and also we have one server, DNS server. Okay, as we can see that we have two network here, so means that we need to make sure that PC1, all right, so I'm sorry, PC1 will be assigned the IP address from this network 10.0, while the PC2 will obtain the IP address from 11.0. Okay, so these are the configurations that we are going to do later in the lab sessions. All right. Okay, so let's learn about the theory first. Okay, for us to do the configurations, there are few steps that we need to follow. Okay, so the first step is to configure the LS DHCP server. So first step is to exclude the IPv4 address. So we can use a single address or a range of address. Okay, so this can be configured by specifying the low address and the high address, which is the start address and the end address of the range. Okay, so means that the first step is we are going to exclude the IP address. The exclusions means that this IP address will be not assigned from the pool. Okay, so means that we exclude this IP address from being given. Okay, from being given by the DHCP server. So excluded address should be those address that are assigned to the routers, servers, printers, or any other device that require for the static IP configuration. So we need to reserve this IP address for these devices. For example, routers, servers, CCTV, or any devices that require IP static. Okay, so we need to reserve, or in Cisco words, we are using the exclusions. We need to exclude this IP address. Alright, so the command is by using the IP DHCP excluded address, and then we need to put the low address and the high address. Okay, the step number two, so the step one is exclusions. The step number two is about to create a pool name. Okay, so we need to create a pool, one pool. Okay, for example, for the previous diagram, as you can see the previous diagram, we have two networks, mean that we need to have two pools. Okay, so the second step is to define the pool name. Okay, so this can be done by using the configurations IP DHCP pool, and we need to give the pool names. Okay, so this will create the pool with the specified names and puts the router in DHCP configuration mode. Okay, we need means that we need to do the configurations inside the global configurations mode. Okay. Right, so the step number three is we need to configure the DHCP pools. Okay, step number two, we create DHCP pool, and the step three is about to do the configurations of the pool itself. Okay, so for the DHCP pool, we need to configure and advertise the network itself. Okay, by using the network address and also the subnet mask. Okay. Then we also need to configure the default router, which is we are going to use our gateway or our default gateway address. Okay, then we also can provide others optional configurations for this pool. Okay, we can use or we can define the DNS servers, we can define the domain names, and define the durations of the HTTP list, and also define the net BIOS win server. So all of these, okay, others configuration is optional, right? So we can configure as optional, right? All right, so this is the example of the configurations to configure R1 as a DHCP server. Okay, so remember that okay, please remember that the first step is to do the exclusion. So we need to exclude the address. So this is the configurations for this network 192.168.10.0 network. Okay, as you can see that we need to use a command IP DHCP excluded, and then we give the low IP address and the high IP address, which is the start IP address and the end of IP address that we want to exclude. And also we can use multiple times to do the to exclude the address. We can use the multiple times, or okay, first we can use a range, and also we can use a single IP address for the exclusions. Okay, so this is the first step, and then for the second step, this is the second step, which is we create the pool name. Okay, by using the command IP DHCP pool LAN, and then we give a name. So this is the name for the pool one. Okay, so pool one is here. So this is the LAN pool name, LAN pool one. All right. So this network should be LAN pool two. So this is the name of the pool. Okay, and then we need to configure the step three, which is we need to configure that pool. Okay, so we can do the configuration. So we need to do the configurations, advertise the network including the subnet mask. Okay, this one we advertise the network, we configure the default router, and then okay, which is 192.168.10.1, which is this is our default gateway. Okay, so the IP address here, and then these are the optional, which is we also can configure DNS server 11.6. Okay, this one is DNS server, I think 11.5. This one is 11.5. Okay, so DNS server 11.5. And also domain name, we also can configure the domain name, for example domain name example.com. Okay, so these are the optional. Okay, so we need to configure step 3, we need to configure the DHCP pool. Okay, which is we need to configure the network, advertise the network, and also configure the default router. Okay, then for the optional, we can configure the DNS server and also the domain name. Right. Okay, after do the configurations, we need to verify the DHCP configuration. So we can use the command show running config pipe combined with the section of DHCP. So this command basically will display the DHCP commands configured on the router, because we are requesting, okay, the commands DHCP from running config. So it will display the configurations command from the show run. Okay, so next we also can use show IP DHCP binding, which is we want to see which IP address has been bind, okay, by the DHCP version 4 services. And then for the third show configuration, we can verify by using a command show IP DHCP server statistic, which is we can find the information, the count information regarding the number of DHCP version 4 message. All right, so this is the operationals, and we can see that show running config right with the section DHCP, so we can see the configuration that start with the words DHCP. That's why we can see the configuration from the show run. It will display only the configurations that involve the words DHCP. All right. So this is first, and then for second, we can also by using the verify by using the DHCP version 4 bindings. Okay, show IP DHCP binding, so we can see that which IP address has been bind to the MAC address. Okay, and also we have the information about the lease expirations. Okay, next is about the statistic, verify DHCP version 4 statistic. From this, we can see the informations, the count informations about the message. Okay, for example, we can see here we have DHCP discover, request DHCP others information. Okay, and also we can see that how many numbers of address pools, and then how many counter for the automatic binding and so on. All right, so this one is the configurations, the verifications inside the host itself. For example, from the student's machine. Okay, you can see that here by using the commands IP config/all, we can verify the configuration. So we can see the domain DNS name. Okay, example.com. If you configure the DNS name, so the information should be obtained here. And then we also can see the information about the IP address that has been assigned to this machine. We also can see the information about the default gateway, and also can see if we configure the NetApp server. All right. So these two is optional lah, which is if we configure, then it should be appear here. All right. All right. So this one is about the DHCP service DHCP. So by default, this service DHCP will be enabled, but if we do not do any configurations, then it will make no effect. Okay, if there is no parameter configured, so no worry about this. But if you do the configurations, you enable you configure the parameters, then we need to make sure that we have everything being configured correctly. Right. Okay, so DHCP service done. All right, so next, okay, we stop here and then we focus on the configurations first. Okay, let me stop the broadcastings. All right, so let me share the slide. Okay, just leave a call. All right, so let me share the screen. Okay, so now we are going to do the configurations. Okay, so we have, please open the Cisco Packet Tracer version 8. All right, so this is, let me see the diagram. Okay, so we are going to use the same diagram as previous slide. So we have PC1 connected to the switch 1, so we can use any available switch. Okay, I'm sorry, so this is the router. I'm using 2901, and then for switches I'm using 2960. So these are the configurations, the diagram. We have PC1 connected to the switch and also connected to the routers, and then from the router we are going connected, it will connect it to the switches and also connected to the PC2. Okay, then we have DNS server. All right, so let's do the configurations. Okay, let's say we have here connections. Okay, fast Ethernet. Right, so gigabit, let's using gigabit 0/0, and then gigabit 0/1 is connected to gigabit 0/1, and then from the switch we can use, right, fast Ethernet, so no problem, fast Ethernet to the PC1. Okay, so this is the connection. Okay, so let use the right names. Okay, PC1, let's say S1, R1, S2. So let's say this is the DNS server. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, the network address here is 192.168.10.0/24. Right, so while to this network, the site is 192.168.11.0/24. Okay, these are the two network. Okay, so 10.0, 11.0, and then for the interface, we are going to configure .1 here, okay, and also .1 here, right? So let's fill color, select the fill color. So let's say I'm using the green for this network. Okay, check first. Okay. All right, so this is the first network, and then for the first pool, and then for the second network, we are going to configure and choose the color. All right, so please, okay, I'm using the blue. All right, so this is the second network. All right, so let's do the configurations. Okay, so we need to configure the IP address of this server. Okay, enable config t, and then change the host name first, just to make sure that we are using the right router, so router 1, and then we need to assign the IP address to this interface. Okay, interface G0/0 IP address 192.168.10.1, 255.255.255.0. Okay, no shut, turn on the devices, and then do the configurations for the next interface, which is interface gigabit 0/1. Set the IP address, configure the IP address 192.168.11.1, okay, 255.255.255.0, no shut, right? So now we can see that the both interface is up. Show IP interface brief. Okay, so we can see that. All right, so we can see that these two address has been up. All right, so let's, before we do the configuration of the DHCP server inside R1, so let's try the configuration by using the static configurations. Okay, so just to make sure that everything is running fine and well. Okay, for example, we are using the PC1, we are using the 192.168.10. Let's say I'm using the 100s. Okay, and then for the default gateway, our gigabit 0/0 IP address, so 192.168.10.1. Okay, and then let's say this is the DNS server 192.168.11.5. Right, so these are the first configuration, and then for the PC2, we configure 192.168.11.100, for example, and then the for default gateway 192.168.11.1. For DNS server 192.168.11.5, right? And then for DNS server we configure the IP address 192.168.11.5 subnet mask, default gateway 192.168, uh, 11.1, and then data server 192.168.11.5. All right. So this is the static IP address, which is when we try to ping from this PC1 to PC2. Okay, ping 192.168.11.100. It should be connected. Okay, 11.100 will take times for the first time. As we can see that there are connections from PC1 to PC2 because they're using the interface from the same router. So inside the routing table, you will have the information about for both network. So that's why when we configure manual IP address, it can be connected. All right. So let's try also ping to the DNS server. Okay, suppose should be work also. Okay, so this is the configuration for the static. All right. So now what we are going to do is let's change this information from statics to DHCP server. And we can see that without DHCP server's configuration on R1, absolutely we will not receive any informations about we not receive and obtain IPv4 address. As you can see that we receive IP address 169.254 okay .184.57. Basically, when we receive any IP address starting from 169.254.x.x means that we receive the IP address automatically automatic private IP. Okay, so we receive these informations. It shows that the communications with the DHCP server is failed, right? So if you see that IP address starting from 169.254.xx, so means that it will not have the connectivity to the server. Okay, so there is no IP address received and obtained. Okay, same goes here. There is no IP address will be received and obtained by PC2. So now we are going to configure. So please remember that there are 3 steps. So the first step we need to do the exclusion IP address. Okay, so let's start with the config T, and then IP DHCP. Okay, and then you can see that IP DHCP you can exclude the address. So IP DHCP, and then you can exclude the address question mark, and you can see that we need to advertise the low IP address. Okay, so let's say we are going to exclude the address from 192.168.10.1. We want to exclude this IP address 192.168.10.9. Okay, so this is using the range, and we also can use a single IP address. So this is the configurations to exclude this address, to exclude the address starting from 10.1 to 10.9. So the server, if we do the configuration of the DHCP server, so the CP server will start release the IP address starting from 10 and above. Okay, so next step is to configure, okay, to configure the pool name, right? Just to configure the pool name. Okay, so IP DHCP question marks, we can see that we have the pool, so we can use pool, and then we can see that words. So words mean that you need to give a name. All right, so we can use any name, for example LAN pool -1. Okay, so this is the configuration. Once you key in this pool, then you are going and enter into the DHCP configurations mode, right? So now we are going to advertise the network task 3. Okay, step 3, advertise the network. So which is we need to advertise the network address. Okay, 192.168.10.0, including with the subnet mask. Okay, I'm sorry, 255.255.0. Okay, and then default router 192.168 10.1. Okay. Okay, let's say we are not configuring yet the informations about domain name and also DNS server. Okay, so now we look into this configuration. Is it we receive the IP address? Okay, okay. As you can see that the HTTP request is successful. Okay, so however, we can see that DNS server is not being received and sent by the DHCP server. So that's why we doesn't have any informations about the DNS server. So this is the optional. Okay, right? So let's say we ping. Okay, so now we try to ping back to this DNS server. Is it successful? Yes, it's successful because of we already obtained that IP address. As you can see that the IP address received is 10 because of the range start from we exclude the IP address starting from 1 to 1 to 9. So that's why the server will release the next IP address which is 10. Okay, so right, so let's say we add more information, more configurations, domain name, let's say forest.com, and also DNS server 192.168.11.5. Okay, and we can see the configurations. Is it the PC1? We obtain these informations. Okay, right, so as you can see that DNS server has been, the IP address for DNS server has been received. Okay, so now we need to do the configuration also for the pool 2, which is, okay, we do the same things. Okay, for the pool number 2, we use IP DHCP exclusion address 192.168.11.1, 192.168.11.9, for example. Okay, and then 254, right? And then we create the name IPDHCP pool. The step number 2, we create the pool name, and then we give the name LAN dash pool dash 2. Okay, and then advertise the network for the LAN pool 2 192.168.11.0 with the subnet mask. Okay, settle, and then default router 192.168.11.1, domain name forest.com, and also DNS server 192.168.11.5. Okay, so let's see is this configuration successful. Okay, so let's try. As you can see that we obtain these informations. Okay, so we have this DHCP informations obtained by the client. So the IP address that has been assigned is 11.10. Okay, so just to confirm back, okay, so this is the first IP address. Okay, all right, so for the verification, so let's see the verifications. Okay, let's see the verifications. We can use the command to verify by using the command, okay, show running config, okay, pipe with the sections DHCP. So from this we can see that these are the configurations inside the show runs that involve with the DHCP, the words DHCP. All right. For the second verification, we also can use the command show IP DHCP binding to see the informations that that address bind to the MAC address. So we can see that for PC1 and PC2, we have this information, IP address information, and also the MAC address. Okay, the MAC address information. But for the list expiration, there is no information for the list expiration because we do not configure the list expiration. Okay, and then for the next verification, we also can use a command show IP DHCP server statistic. Okay, IP DHCP server show IP DHCP okay, show IP DHCP server I think show IP DHCP. All right, so this information is not available inside this Cisco packet tracer. Okay, so suppose we can issue the command show IP DHCP server statistic, but this command is unavailable and recognized for the Cisco packet tracer. So, okay, so no problem. Right. So the first part is settled, which is we already configure DHCP server, okay, on the client. All right. So now let's move to the second part, which is we needs to configure DHCP relay. Okay. Right. So let's look into the slide. DHCP relay. Right. Okay. So let's say if we have this diagram, as you can see that we have 10.0 networks. So R1 is no longer configured as a DHCP server. So now we have one dedicated server is here, DHCP version 4 server being located at S2. Okay, so because of this server is located at a different network, when the PC1 send the broadcast message, okay, we know that the broadcast message will be sent within the networks. Okay, so that's why R1 cannot forward the broadcast message between the networks. Okay, because PC1 is located at the network 10.0, while the server, the DHCP server is located at 11.0. So means that when the PC1 send the broadcast message, which is send DHCP discover requesting for the IP address, right? So R1 unable to forward the broadcast message to this DHCP server. So means that this DHCP server is unable to release or to reply or to react to the DHCP discover message from the PC1. Okay, so that's why we need to configure DHCP relay agent. Okay, so DHCP relay agent, DHCP relay, basically what DHCP relay will do is it will forward the broadcast message that's belong to the DHCP message, okay, to the different network. Okay, so we need to configure the DHCP inside the interface, and also we need to point to the server itself. Okay, so as you can see that this is the configuration. We need to configure the R1 by using the command IP helper inside the address interface. Okay, and also we need to advertise the IP address of the server itself. Okay, so let's do the configurations. Okay, so let's say config T. So we know that to disable by default the DHCP server is enabled, so we can use a command no service DHCP so to disable the DHCP server. Okay, so and then we save the configurations. Right, so let's see if DHCP still works or not. Okay, so we try back DHCP. Suppose the DHCP has been disabled, so there is no longer DHCP configurations on R1. Okay, okay, so now we have let's say we have one server. Okay, so this is the DHCP server. Right, so DHCP server. So I put the IP address. So the DNS server is 192.168.11.5. Okay, so for the DHCP server 192.168.11.6. Okay, right. So we do the connections. Okay, we do the connections and we configure the static IP for this DHCP server. Okay, 192.168.11.6. Subnet mask default gateway 192.168.11.1. Okay, DNS server 192.168.11.6. Okay, now DNS server is 5. Okay, right. Okay, once the DHCP server is connected, we see is PC2 receive the IP address. Okay, suppose no, it's not received the IP address yet because of we doesn't uh, configure yet the DHCP. Okay, so go to the desktop and go to the services and then go to the DHCP so we can enable the services. Okay, for this DHCP server. Okay, as you can see that we have a default server pool. So when we turn on this service, okay, because we cannot remove this one, so we need to modify this one. Okay, so when we turn on these services, what happened is we can see that PC1 will receive the IP address. Okay, but the problem is because of this IP address being released is 11.2. Okay, and then there is no default gateway information being released. This is because of inside the DHCP server there are uh, default configuration for the server pool. Okay, so we cannot rename this one. So what we can do is basically we can change the informations. All right. Okay, so we if you try to change the server pool's name, right, and then to try to save that, it will say that it will come up with the information that you cannot, the server pool's name cannot be modified or edited. Right, a new pool will be added. So we need to remove this one. Okay, so for the default, we just do the configuration for 11.0 network. So we have default gateway 11.1. So the NS server 192.168. Right, so 192.168.11. The NS server is 5, and then start IP address. So the IP address that we want to release, okay, there is no exclusion here. So what we need to do is we want to make sure that DHCP will start assigning or release this IP address. So we need to make sure that there is no the starting IP uh, should be not involved with your exclusion IP address. So for example, we can start using 10. Okay, so this DHCP server will release the first IP address will be released is 10, and then it will be increased one by one. And then we also can configure the maximum number of the users. So for example, let's say we put 10, so means that only 10 users will be receive the IP address from the DHCP server. Okay, and then we can save the informations. All right, so then we can see and check back, is it we receive the information about this. Okay, so now we receive the IPv4 address 11.10, and also default gateway have the information 11.1, and the NS server also 11.5. So means that these are the right configurations for the DHCP. Okay, so now we are going to configure for 10.0 network, which is we needs to add the pool. All right, so we add the new pools. Okay, so we give a name. Right, so pool name is, so let's say we put pool 2, and then for the pool 2 network 10.0 network, so the default gateway for the 10.0 network is 10.1, and then for the NS server is still same 11.5, and then for the starting IP address should be 192.168.10. We can start the same things. The first IP address we will release is 10, and also the maximum number we set to the 10, and then we click the button add, so it will add the new pool. All right, server pool 1 and pool 2. So means that we already configure, okay, for 192.168.10.0 pool, and also configure for 11.0 pool. Okay, so PC2 successfully received the informations about the IP address automatically. But how about the PC1? Okay, can we see the configurations? All right, so we try to check, is it the configuration is successful or not? Okay, so as we can see that the DHCP server is failed. Okay, this is because I mentioned earlier, when PC1 send the broadcast message, because of the broadcast message is unable to be forward from R2 to the DHCP server. So that's why the DHCP server will not receive any broadcast message. Okay, DHCP discovered by PC1. So that's why we need to configure R1 as the relay agent. Okay, so let's configure the relay, DHCP relay for this R1. So we need to configure inside interface. So we need to enter into the interface D0/0. And also we need to use a command IP helper. Okay, right. So IP helper, and then use the uh, inside the IP. Okay, you just check back helper address, IP helper address, and then we point back to the this DHCP server address, so 192.168.11.6, right? Okay, so just that. So now we can try back, okay, to see is the configuration is successful or not. Okay, and yes, we can see that the configurations, the request for DHCP request is successful. Okay, so I hope that everyone will learn, okay, and understands how to configure R1 as a DHCP server, and also about the DHCP relay. Okay, to configure the DHCP relay. For the next part is about the configurations to configure R1 as a DHCP server and as a DHCP client. Okay, so it will be covered on the next chapter. Okay, on the next class. All right. So I think just that for our class lesson. So I hope that everyone uh, will clear. Okay, and then you can view back the recorded video to might be this lecture and also the lab configuration is quite fast, but no problem as this is recorded, so you can view back. Okay, so if you have any question, then you can ask inside our class Google Classroom. So I hope everyone will have the clear understandings about how to configure DHCP server inside router. Okay, and not just router, we also can configure it to the switch. Okay, so I think it's that for our class session. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.